Welcome to another video on controlling your visual effects using your model editing programs. In this one, we're going to look at a fun trick where we use a second set of UV coordinates to control the way in which a specific effect occurs, in this case, Unity. So this technique can really be used in any engine. In this particular example, I will be primarily showing this in Unity, although from the previous tutorials, you should be able to work out where the same nodes are for Unreal. So first of all, let's look at the technique we're going to look at. So if you notice here, we can see nothing in our scene view, but you will notice in our hierarchy, there is an object in the scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build the robot object. So we're going to drag this slider. And you can see we build the robot inside first, and then we skin it out. So this is a neat little trick. You may recognize a similar trick done within Planetary Annihilation when you see little units getting built. I imagine they're using a fairly similar technique to this. So this is a neat little trick that can be used in a number of different ways, and we're controlling the way that this robot is built using a set of UVs. So if we jump into Photoshop, we can see our black and white gradient. This is what's controlling our fill. So you can see that's what's controlling how we fill in and how we fill out. And the grid color as our value here, we can change what color it is. So if we wanted to make it a vibrant red, we could make it a vibrant red. Or we could remove it altogether, and you can see that the character just pops into existence. So this technique is actually relatively straightforward. If we jump into our modeling program in 3ds Max and grab our, whoopsie daisies. So we can see here we have an outside model and an inside model. They're linked up to each other so that we can have them as part of the same unit. And if we select our main character here, just deselect these nodes here and unwrap it. Let's go into the UV editor. You can see our, whoopsie daisies, I've selected the internal as well. Let's delete that quickly. So hide the inside, and let's just select the outside shell. So if we just grab the outer shell and say unwrap UVW, you can see our UV map for this character. And you can see that it's a bit unusual. If I were doing a normal UV unwrap, we wouldn't be doing it just as a straight forwards on planar projection. But in this context, what I want to do is I want to build the feet before I build the head. So in this context, what it will do is it will build the feet before the head, as you can see currently happening in this particular one. As I drag it, we'll see it building upwards along that UV map. And you can see that we're building the inside at a different rate to the outside. So if we hide this externals and show us the internals and open it up in a UV editor, you can see that we have our internals. Now in this one, what we've done is we have shortened and skewed our model slightly. And in this way, this allows us to build it at a different rate to the exterior. So as our gradient moves upwards on our UV, you can see that it will reach the tip of the head of this robot before it reaches the tip of the head of the other robot, even though their heads are at essentially the same position. And you can see here, I've moved some bits and pieces around, so they'll build at different rates. So if I take our arms, and let's make it so that they build after the shoulders, like so. By moving them around, we can change the order in which they're built. So let's have the arms build outwards from the shoulder by moving them at angles like this. So this will be a fun little trick to show you how, just by now adjusting where things are on the UV spectrum, we can see how it's going to build. So as our line goes up, it will build the body, and then it will build the arms out while it's doing the head. So if we take our object now, let's deselect that modifier, export it. Now I'm going to override our original one in the project, bring it up in the project, And now let's build it. So now you can see it'll come up and do the shoulders, then move down and do the arms, and then do the rest of the body. So you can see how quickly we can begin to control exactly how this robot's going to build. So if I wanted to take our exterior again, this time, whoops, daisies, there we go. Let's deselect these nodes. Grab our exterior, and if I wanted to be a bit silly, I could grab him, turn him on his head, grab him, export, now very quickly you're going to see he's going to build in opposing directions. So this is a great trick. So when we jump into our shader code, character construction, now this was built from a slightly different shader that we'll be looking at later. So try and ignore the bits and pieces that are unnecessary. So now if we jump into our input struct, you can see that I've created a float called UV fill, and I've called it text coord 1. This is how you're able to call a specific texture coordinate that you otherwise might not get access to. So if we jump back into our UV editor here, you can see that our map channel here is set to 1. And if we move it into map channel 2 and open it up, you can see our skull here set up in map channel 2, and that's the one that we're currently reading from. So how you control which map channel, well, UV map channel you want to be able to read from is what number you put into this text coord. And remember that this text coordinate numbers itself from 0 upwards. So 0 within this texture coordinate is map channel 1 in 3ds Max. This is important because we're not going to want to have this UVW map override what texture coordinates we have for the actual application of textures. So in this context, what we do is we apply a texture using UV coordinate or map channel 1, and then we apply our effects channel in map channel 2, and we call it by creating a second UV channel within our struct input. And then when you go down into our UV, we can call that value in the same way that we would call a normal texture. So instead of this, we say in.uv.x and in uvfill.y. And you can see here, this is where I'm adjusting our UV fill. So what I'm doing is I am taking the y value, I'm crunching it up so that it's a little bit truncate, so that it's a bit wider. And then in here, I'm adding a height value on so that we can easily adjust the height. So that will move it through that YUV coordinate, looking up a different component within our black and white fill gradient. And then that value is being put into the emission channel, where what we do is we blend the color, a grid color in, depending on how close we are to being that exact value. So if we jump up here, you can see GX is our clip value, and we're using that as a way of being able to decide whether or not we're close to being clipped or we're not. And if we go up here, you can see that we're taking our fill value and we're clipping it out so that it will get discarded. And that's what this clip value here is. I'll make some of these shaders available so that you can take a little bit more detailed look, but again, I'm not going to go into too much detail because you can get quite lost, and it would take me some time to show exactly how to do that shader code, but that's another way in which you can control it. So if you're working with a technical artist, or if you're working with a programmer, these are how you can be able to control specific effects in great detail without having to go back and forth with them and try and fix things up and get them to feel just right. Whereas you can just move them and say, well, this is exactly the order that the robot will build when we drag between two values. In later tutorials, we'll be looking at how we can use this specific UV setup so that we can control other effects in our model that don't relate to having to look up textures, because there's a structure in which we can use this same UV coordinate system so that we can control things that include the actual structure of the mesh itself. Thanks very much, and